Hey, what's up, guys? This is Sunny, and I'm here with my boys, Dean and Mark. And we've actually known each other for like over 10 years now. And what kept us together is that, we call this thing a truth seeker mentality. We've been sort of truth seekers in a lot of different areas in life, but we wanted to start this podcast to mainly talk about a lot about MMA and UFC because we're all of us are very passionate about that, and also at some point we might talk about dating and relationships and other areas as well. But yeah, today we wanted to actually do some MMA podcast, and I'll let Dean and Mark introduce themselves. So, Mark, why don't you go first?
Hey, what's up, guys? I'm Mark, and again, I've known Sunny and Dean for a while, and of course, people have known me from other places as well. I've been in other fields. So basically, I agree with everything that Sunny said. This is called the Truth Seekers Podcast, and all it really means is the ability or just the mentality of always trying to find the truth, no matter how much it hurts. That's the best way I can describe it at this moment. And this has got us lots of success in different areas. I know Sonny's doing very well in his field. I know Dean, who's actually this is his actually field. Like he does very, very good at sports betting. And to do well at sports betting, to make a career out of sports betting means that you have to be on some truth seeker stuff, and you can't always go with your gut or how you feel emotionally. And in my craft, I've done a lot of stuff too in the social stuff. I was in the dating field for a while, and I had to do a lot of truth-seeking things as well, just to make sense out of the world and the chaotic environment that I was doing in. And we all were outliers in our own respective fields. And I know a lot of other people that I consider truth seekers who I feel like are outliers too. So truth seeking is really just a mentality that helps people. But again, we don't want to take too long on this. I know a lot of people are here to see the Kevin Lee versus the
Barboza.
Barboza, and also what we think about him versus Khabib, et cetera, et cetera. Yeah, Dean, I guess I already spoke for Dean already. If you want to say anything more, let me know.
No, I agree with everything you said, and I just want to start talking about Kevin Lee, man.
All right, so basically, I guess, we were supposed to do this podcast exactly when it came out. We said that a day before, but, it's our first time doing this. However, I want to say that at this point, I feel like, I think we all can agree at this point, or, I feel like Kevin Lee is probably, the candidate for the future of the 155/165 or 170 division, coming in the next few years. I can't see why he shouldn't be unless something dramatically crazy happens, like he gets some kind of freak accident. What are you guys' thoughts?
Yeah, so basically, I actually watched Kevin Lee's interview with Joe Rogan that just came out, and I watched the whole thing. The thing with Kevin Lee that impressed me the most is that he's still very young, only 25 years old, and he seems like he has a really good head on his shoulder, man. Like the guy just sounded very smart. He's learning from different sources and stuff like that. So besides the fact that he's already a great fighter, and we could talk more about the Barboza fight that happened last weekend. It was a great, phenomenal performance from Lee. But also on top of that, like looking at this guy who's still young, hungry, and on top of that, very smart and trying to learn from every place where he can learn from. I think he has tremendous potential, and I'm just personally I'm a big fan of Kevin Lee.
Yeah, I mean, I have to say that too. I mean, what are your thoughts, Dean?
Yeah, pretty much. I think the thing about Kevin Lee is he's on the true seeker vibe, So he seems like he's just very committed to understanding his craft as well as possible, learning wherever he can, being as humble as possible. And it's just so rare that you get that from somebody who's also just a freak physically. Like he has super long arms, he's super strong, super athletic. He's technically an amazing wrestler, an amazing grappler. His striking is quickly improving. So it's like when you kind of have all these physical gifts and you're good at everything, and you're also a truth seeker who sees the world through a very intelligent lens and is always striving to get better and better. I think that just kind of creates just a very it creates pretty much like limitless upside, where I just don't think you can't put a cap on his ceiling, because first of all, just from a physical standpoint, like most of the people in his division just aren't as strong and athletic and don't have as long of a reach as him, and then they're even less truth seeker. Like compare him to like Justin Gaethje, who's a top 10 fighter, but He has much shorter arms. He's not as athletic, and he is way less truth seekery, but he's still top 10. So, as Kevin Lee improves with age, I think we're just going to see more performances like the Barboza or even Tony Ferguson. He was dominant in round 1 versus Tony Ferguson. He just gassed out because of the staff. So I think you're just going to see more performances that just, completely blow our mind where we're just like, man, I did not expect that to happen. And he's just going to keep exceeding expectations.
Yeah, no, I wanted to say that the first time Dean told me about Kevin Lee, I didn't have time to research him that well. And at first I thought, he's just probably a freak athlete who probably would just rely on that and not try to improve his game. Like the big knock on a lot of athletes is that they don't try to improve their game in certain ways. They just kind of just depend on the athleticism versus understanding technique, skill, and the intricacies of the various forms of mixed martial arts. And after I saw the Tony fight, even though he lost, I was highly impressed. It was one of the most impressive things I've seen, actually. The way he, with the staph infection, of course, the way he was able to escape a fucking arm bar. I mean, not much people can do it like that. The way he's been able to take Tony down, and Tony has, generally very good takedown defense, and he's really good off his back. And just a few of those instances, I really saw, like, wow, this guy, Dean was correct. This guy has amazing strength. He's probably the strongest guy in his division, arguably. He seems definitely to be the most athletic. But on top of that, when you hear his podcast, I think everyone should check out his podcast with Joe Rogan. The way his mind works is that he's on that type of level like George St. Pierre in terms of truth seeking, trying his best. Of course, he talked a lot of shit, so a lot of people didn't like him in the beginning. That's the big knock against him. And of course, he's being African American, whatever, it's going to be a little bit more difficult to get the notoriety without winning, and despite all that, if you listen to his podcast, I mean, the things he's talking about, doing dance classes. One thing that really impressed me with Kevin Lee also, and we'll get into the Barboza fight in a bit, but was in the podcast, he actually said that he looks for the youth. He said, like, the generation even below him now, he's still a young fighter, 25. He said even the guys that are 16, 17, so those guys are serious, man. And he feels that every generation brings a new kind of art form to the game, a new twist, new perspective, right? Because most of the people in the later generations, they kind of came in the MMA world late. Like, some people were kickboxers before, some people were just jiu-jitsu guys before. Where the new school, they're being forced to have to disregard at least 80% of most of the arts that's not irrelevant. Like, for example, Taekwondo, maybe 80% of it won't really help you in a real fight. Maybe for Jiu-Jitsu, only certain things will help you in at least a mixed martial arts bout. So they're able to take away all the most important stuff now, the younger guys, and hone in on becoming that true mixed martial artist as opposed to a master of one. So Kevin Lee actually, clearly said this, and he said because of that, as he ages, he's going to continue training and sparring with some of the youngest guys out there just to get that fresh perspective. Because what happens a lot of times is the game leaves most of the top stars. Even George St. Pierre had mentioned that, like, at this time in his life, if he goes back to fighting the welterweight, he said, like, he can't, even the best George St. Pierre, the other guys are better than. He actually said that in his interview before he fought Michael Bisping. And I thought that was a really true seeker of George St. Pierre. He never had to admit anything like that. But the fact that he could say it so humbling, it was just, and it's the truth, we can all kind of see it, but, it's a true thing. And I see Kevin Lee having that kind of mentality as well, on top of his athleticism, on top of his age, and on top of this magnificent performance he had over Edson Barboza. I have to give my hats off to Kevin Lee, and I definitely see him as the future of the division.
Yeah, man. So like you mentioned, I think the point about him doing dance classes, and also he was talking about it, he's doing yoga, where he mentions at one point, is like, I was embarrassed to tell people, like, I'm actually going to yoga class, but I started doing it because it was helping him a lot. So seeing him on that level, that he's trying all these different things, and then also the fact that he's trying to learn from new generation, like all these kids who are coming, who are 15, 16 years old, that are bringing something new that he's looking at. And also he mentioned that he moved to Vegas just because he wanted to train with different people. And Vegas always has fighters who come in and train for a week or two and then go back from wherever they're from. So for him to actually be there and learning, and also I think he has really good coaches. Like, I don't know his coaches that well, but it seemed like he has really good camp and his coaches and everyone. And then on top of that, I think a lot of athletes or fighters, they kind of hit their peak in their late 20s or even some of them in their early 30s. So seeing that Kevin Lee also has time on his side, he's only 25 right now, and he has that truth-seeking mentality. I think he's definitely the future of this division, or 165 if they make that, whatever that happens with the weight class. But I think he's definitely the future of this division. Maybe even UFC. He could totally be like the greatest fighter in UFC if he kind of like puts his mind right and keeps practicing and training and everything.
Yeah, definitely. I agree with that. The only thing is that, maybe his chin isn't good enough to be the greatest, but still at the same time, his chin isn't that bad. And maybe if he eventually moves to 170, he'll have better chin and better cardio, and he'll still be a he-man at that division. So I definitely see him as somebody who could
he's also cutting a lot of weight, man. He was talking about how he walks around at like 185. And so he's basically saying that he cuts from 185 down to 155. And even like a week before, he's at 176, 175. So he's cutting a lot of weight, which I'm pretty sure is affecting his chin. Although even with the Barboza fight, he caught him really well with the spinning back kick or whatever. And he wobbled, but he recovered really well. But his chin has always been kind of a concern. Just looking at him, he's great talent, a lot of potential, but his chin. But I think that if he does move up to 165, if they create that weight class, that might actually not be as big of an issue that we think right now.
Oh, yeah, definitely. I think the best thing that could happen for him is that they create a 165 weight class, because he's custom built for 165. And right now it's just kind of awkward because he's kind of stuck halfway between 155 and 170. So he's just going to keep fighting 155 as long as he can until they create a 165. But even in spite of all those issues, he's still cleaning up in 155. Like Barboza caught him, but he recovered quickly. Like Tony never really had him in danger of being finished, at least with strikes. I mean, I know he finished him off his back. So for whatever chin concerns he has, he's definitely not as bad as like Luke Rockhold in that regard. And, most importantly is his wrestling just so good. He just takes people down to the floor at will. And I've just never really seen this from any other MMA fighter, where when the other guy's like defending the takedown perfectly, it doesn't matter because he just lifts them up and slams them to the ground. And it's almost like a cheat code where he's just so strong. He can just take down people no matter what. Even people like Tony Ferguson or Edson Barboza, who are very strong and have very good takedown defense. So, the fact that I think part of the reason why he stands in trades, or I know part of the reason, is he just wants to test himself. He wants to show people that he can do everything. He's not just a wrestler. He's not just a grappler. He also is striking. He's improving striking. And he showed that versus Tony and Barboza, who were supposed to be the much better strikers than them, that he could stand toe to toe and strike very evenly with them. And go on.
Oh, sorry, but no, go ahead, finish it.
Well, yeah. So yeah, I mean, I think that's just what's really special. But he also, so I think over time he's going to end up out striking those guys as his striking improves with age. And still, even if let's say he has the biggest fight of his life against Conor, and he has to worry about Conor knocking him out. Well, in that fight, he can just be like, you know what? I'm just gonna take Conor down to the ground in like the first 10 seconds because I don't want to risk the KO. He can probably do that.
Yeah, one thing I noticed about the fight with Edson Barboza and Kevin Lee is that Kevin Lee, he actually came. I think that's the perfect fight, and the reason why I'm saying that is the people might say, "Well, Khabib dominated, right?" Yes. Kevin Lee, if he wanted to, could have done the same thing over and over and bulldoze him also. What I think Kevin Lee was trying to do, he's trying to do a long-term strategy to test his greatness. Because when you're in training camp, you can't really train as hard as a real fight, especially like the top-tier guy like Edson Barboza. And in terms of his chin, it's arguable to see how weak his chin is because, Michael Johnson rocked Khabib at 1.2, right? Now, of course, maybe it wasn't as wobbly, but then again, a kick is still stronger than a punch as well, right? So an Edson Barboza clean head kick can still do probably more damage than a clean punch. Of course, it depends on the angle, but on average, a leg is heavier than a fist. So I like what I like about that fight was at first he took him down masterfully, showed that he can do just what Khabib can do, maybe arguably not as consistent, who knows, but at least more powerfully, he can do more damage in a shorter period of time. So that was very impressive. He was able to control him on the ground and pound him out. But then after that, watch him go on his feet as well and just strike with him. I'm glad that he got that experience in that practice, and I'm happy that he got kicked. Because then now we can reevaluate how, quote unquote, weak his chin is. And I think the detractors will have less of a narrative of how weak his chin is when he survived it. And not only that, but his fighter spirit, his resilience. I think that's a very important thing as well for him to learn from that experience at the highest level, getting wobbly, figuring it out, using his mixed martial art pedigree of wrestling, combination of striking, being able to go back down, take him down, control the fight, regain his composure, and then go back again and beat him and still give Edson Barboza a run for his money, even with the striking game as well. I thought that was brilliantly executed. I feel like that's a complete fight that demonstrates a lot more areas and tests of Kevin Lee as opposed to anyone else. Now, here's where things get to here's where things get sticky, I guess. My main concern, or my main belief is that Kevin Lee will be the one, or can be the one, or is the highest probability of beating Khabib. Now, it might sound crazy, but when I look at Khabib at this point in time, again, things can change as I get more evidence. Khabib seems to be a guy that mastered a specific art form for all his life. Again, he happened to have an amazing father who was a true Sambo wrestler and who's mastered all the intricacies. And Khabib was able to figure out how to implement that in a mixed martial art fashion. So there's a lot of things that go into Khabib's excellence, and a lot of it could just simply be a style that hasn't really been figured out. Now, this style obviously has to be executed on the highest level. However, when you look at people like Horace Gracie at one point, it's hard to tell. Was it really his cerebralness, or was it the fact that he just trained with his father and his team over and over again with an art form that other art forms weren't prepared to handle, right? Now, the question, what I like about Kevin Lee over Khabib is I feel like Kevin Lee will be the ultimate definition of an all-around full mixed martial artist, a very versatile mixed martial artist. I think that his strength is going to be amazing for his division. I think that his speed is going to be amazing. His arm length is great for his size. Also his resilience, being able to get striked, hit, and get back up and win, amazing. The fact that now he can take down at will, in combination, he can still stand up, and his striking is constantly improving, especially he's only 25. And I just feel like in the long run, Kevin Lee will have more tools at his disposal than Khabib. I feel like Kevin Lee is more of a true mixed martial artist, where at this point it seemed like Khabib is more of he has that one very powerful move. Again, he's a great fighter. He's a great cerebral. He's a true seeker as well. I love him. I just feel like, 29, 30, it's obvious that he's just doing the same thing over and over again. And again, if it's not broken, don't fix it. However, in terms of complete martial artist, someone who can flip things up on the fly, I really believe that Kevin Lee seems to have more, higher upside potential against multiple foes in the future. As opposed to Kevin Lee, where I still feel like it's almost like a jiu-jitsu era with his very unique style of Sambo wrestling, because how much people are true masters at Sambo anyways, especially currently right now. Not much people, right? Same way how back in the day there was the Brazilian jiu-jitsu with Horace Gracie. I mean, he cleaned up everyone, right? And was it really because of him or because of his father and the style of, the fighting that the other people haven't caught up to yet? So the question is, will people catch up to Khabib? Granted, too, Khabib is still an all-around an amazing wrestler, right? Regardless, right? But the question is can the future generation of fighters catch up with that move? And what happens when he can't get takedowns? Who knows? If someone's able to stop his takedowns or even take him down, what will happen? We don't know that yet. So I think Kevin Lee is the only guy at this point compared to Conor McGregor. What Conor McGregor can do? Just try to get a quick knockout. If that doesn't happen, it hasn't happened anyways, he'll get taken down and pummeled to death. Because even if Nate Diaz can choke him out, and Nate Diaz has tons of losses, right? So Khabib will definitely do that. Against Tony, again, even, we know Khabib probably would have his way against Tony, even though we wanted, it was interesting, but Khabib would still have his way with Tony most likely. And he's younger as well. especially now that Tony's out for probably a year now. When Tony comes back at like 35, I don't know. It's going to be Kevin Lee. It has to be. It's just, if nothing dramatic happens, it just has to be Kevin Lee. Because Kevin Lee, he's strong enough to lift up Khabib and throw him down, right? He's very intense. He's also a pretty good submission artist as well. He has a lot of submission wins. And he's constantly working on his striking. He does ballet, all kind of crazy shit, yoga, just to fucking get his striking. So, yeah, that's my basic bottom line of what I feel about Khabib. I think Kevin Lee. I think Kevin Lee will be the ultimate martial artist that will be able to do everything and do everything very well. In that division, in those type of division, I think that he's going to be quite fantastic.
So yeah, that's a great point though. Like few things that you mentioned, just great point. But so I think in that Barboza fight, actually, Kevin Lee outstruck Barboza. I think his striking was actually really good. So that right off the bat just says a lot about Kevin Lee, that I thought he outstruck Barboza. Dean can speak to it as well. But the only couple concerns that I have about Kevin Lee, which I don't know, he could be good. He's probably, from what I've seen, is number one, we talked about, his chin. So that's still a concern of how good his chin is. Is he going to be able to stand up to, some of the other strikers? Considering Barboza is one of the top strikers, and he was able to actually outstruck him in many ways and also recover from that kick that the head kick. I think, it does show that he has a decent enough chin. The other concern that I have that I don't know right now is his cardio, especially when he gets to the championship fights and he's fighting 5 rounds. When he fights Khabib, it's going to be a 5-round fight. Is he good enough? Is his cardio good enough to actually last the 5 rounds if it goes in the entire duration of the fight? Those would be kind of my concern with Kevin Lee. So his cardio and his chin. So Dean, do you want to talk about, you probably know more about, you've probably seen more of his fights. So what do you think about his cardio?
Well, yeah, I think obviously one of Khabib's biggest advantages versus Kevin Lee is cardio, but at the same time, his cardio is not terrible, because it also helps that, if you've just been beating your opponent down for the first 3 or 4 rounds, the 5th round isn't as bad as we saw with Lee versus Barboza. He's still in rounds 4 and 5, he wasn't as dominant as the first 2 rounds, but he was still winning because he had just issued such a life-changing beatdown. Barboza, and that's also part of the reason why I think for him to really be the GOAT, 165 division would be the ticket, where he would still be a physical freak in terms of reach, strength, etc. But his cardio and chin would probably end up both being above average at that weight. But at the same time, it's just I don't see it as a significant weakness because it's not he was totally gassed. He was still winning that fight clearly.
Yeah, here's a question: when's the last time you really saw Kevin Lee get burned out? Anyways, it's a narrative that's been out there, and I guess people kind of forget the details with the Tony Ferguson fight. So I don't know exactly. I can't really see clear signs of true exhaustion. Even from the last fight, I couldn't see it. Of course, I saw he was tired and his performance was a little bit slower. However, it did look like he was trying to do other things as well. He was trying to stand up and strike, So, it's just hard to say to what degree is his cardio an issue. Of course, it's obvious that what's his name, Khabib has definitely most likely better cardio in certain ways. However, Khabib's less strong. And also, since Khabib is more dominant as a wrestler, it appears at this point in terms of, or that's the way he tries to do all the time, he's always under control. So as they say before, when you move backwards, it's a lot more energy than when you move forward because your muscles are not used to that. We primarily walk forward. So, yeah, when Khabib's doing his normal thing, grinding, pounding, it's not that much energy. But who's to say how his cardio will be effective when his back is against the wall and he has to deal with a lot of pressure? That's a different set of muscles that can create that fatigue as well. Whereas at least with Kevin Lee, again, I don't know. I just don't know the last fight I saw with Kevin Lee. I don't know. Maybe when he was younger, I don't know, but I just haven't seen him get that exhausted. However, I'm only going off the last 2 or 3 fights I saw with him. However, I haven't looked at him down his career. I don't know. What about you, Sonny?
He doesn't normally get late in the fights because he normally finishes in round 1 or round 2, so it doesn't even matter, because he's such a fast finisher. But I mean, even like another example is against Michel Prazeres, who's just like really solid mid-tier dude. That went to 3-round decision, and Kevin Lee like kind of looked tired near the end, but he was still dominating. So at a certain point, like if you're just that good, but you're still like at like 90% energy that you would be if you had like great cardio, you can still be really amazing, you know? So and I think kind of the really interesting thing about the matchup with Khabib is there are a lot of great things about Khabib. You know, he's really good at avoiding damage. You know, he does seem really smart, really strong. But the one thing that kind of just makes him unbeatable is that once he gets you in that dominant position where he's grounding and pounding you, there's nothing you can do. But the thing about Kevin Lee is that Kevin Lee seems like the guy who can avoid getting in that the position where Khabib dominates him. But like to my eye, it looks like Kevin Lee is just like Kevin Lee seems like he's more likely to win takedowns than Khabib. Kevin Lee's more likely to take down Khabib than Khabib is more likely to take down Kevin Lee.
Well, okay, well, that's a strong statement, and I have no idea. But what I will say is that at least Khabib is the one most likely to take down. Kevin Lee is the one to take down Khabib more than anyone else in the division by far. I think that's guaranteed. Even because the thing about Kevin Lee is that he doesn't have to use technique either. He can just lift you up and fucking put you back down, right? And I don't think Khabib's any heavier than the other people he lifted up. Again, he has better technique, but I think that, you know, that point, strength versus strength, you know, it'll be very interesting.
Yeah, and you know, I was just raising the question about his cardio just because, you know, 3-round fights, I get it, like he's good enough, but I was specifically looking at the Khabib fight. If he does fight Khabib, then it's gonna be a championship 5-round fight, and it's just a question that I'm raising. I'm not sure. Maybe he is good enough. Maybe if the fight goes the distance, he can. You know, he'll still have the energy and cardio wouldn't be a big factor. But that's just something back of my head. I'm thinking that I'm not sure if he would be able to kind of like have the energy the whole full 5 rounds.
Well, also, too, we haven't really saw Khabib strongly struggle, right? So, again, when someone's struggling, it's a different set of muscles, a different set of stamina. So it's easy to look like you have a lot of stamina when you're kind of guiding the fight your way. Mm-hmm. And if you have generally good stamina, right? Whereas, you know, when you have to step back from a lot of strikes all the time and you always like your back's against the cage and you're getting out muscled all the time and getting taken down and have to get back up, you know, again, we haven't seen that from Khabib either. So yes, his stamina looks impressive. However, you know, he's not really burning as much energy since he's in his moving forward position that he's already comfortable in.
Yeah, and also I'm just like, also Khabib is just such a special fighter that he's inevitably going to have some advantages over Kevin Lee. And there's no way, you know, any of us can sit here and say Kevin Lee is definitely going to beat Khabib if they fight.
Oh, definitely not.
Of course not. Yeah.
But, you know, like for all the advantages that Khabib has, it seems like Kevin Lee's advantages are very significant. Like, I know that the takedown thing is kind of arguable, but Khabib has struggled. He like struggled to take down Iaquinta after round 3. You know, rounds 3, 4, and 5, he couldn't take him down at all. You know, and Kevin Lee Kevin Lee, even in round 3 versus Tony, when he was gassed with Staff, he still got 2 very good takedowns. So, you know, I just feel like that's a very big advantage. It's possibly a huge.
It's definitely an advantage. But here's the only weird kind of intersection issue, right? Intersection of timelines, right? On one corner you have Khabib at this total prime at this point. You know, he's at 29, 30. You know, he has his shit handled. You know, and his mentality is right for this. Whereas you have Kevin Lee, who's still a student of the game, he still have a deeper growth to have had. You know, and he never probably had the kind of strong guidance of a father figure, all that extra stuff, and all this stuff matters, right? In the way Khabib's father trained him, of course, is totally different, right? That Khabib's father was with him at birth, making him wrestle, right? But when you look at the timeline, of course, Kevin Lee will be able to beat Khabib maybe when Khabib is like, you know, probably 4 years from now, right? They're more likely that to happen then, as opposed to right now they're able to fight. You know, I feel like Kevin Lee still needs a little bit more experience, just to kind of tighten everything up around the edges. However, even if they fought now, I still think he has a great chance. But it's all about the intersection of the maturity of each fighter. Again, they're not both in their prime. What I liked about the Tony versus the Khabib matchup was at least the interception principle. Even though I feel like Kevin Lee is a better matchup than Tony Ferguson for Khabib, I still feel like at least they're both on a run. Especially Tony Ferguson, he done more impressive things in terms of had a more of an impressive resume to some degree, in terms of pure wins and losses, and still just somehow managing to stay in the winning streak for a very long time and on top of his game and at his top maturity. So that's one thing I really dread about the situation with Tony Ferguson, is the fact that he was at his prime at everything, all the parts were moving correctly, and if they had a fight, it would have been at least a good fight to watch with him, and at least we'll definitely know who the best was. Whereas at this point, even if Khabib beats Kevin Lee, Kevin Lee is still relatively young in the game in terms of his mentality, everything. He's just his age, that it's still hard to say, And what if when Kevin Lee becomes at his prime now as a true martial artist, Khabib is kind of past his. Maybe he had a few injuries, not the same. So that's the only kind of issue that I have. It's just about the timeline. They're not exactly at the same timeline, but I believe that Khabib is so brilliant. It's almost remember if Matt Hughes versus versus George St. Pierre. Matt Hughes was at first time George St. Pierre fought Matt Hughes. Again, he was still young. He was still not there yet. But the minute they rematched it later on, he learned from that mistake. Then he ended up becoming champion once again, and then he sustained that for a very long time. Well, then lost to Matt Serra. Then he retained it for a long time. So a lot of times it's all about the maturity and the intersection at which they meet. For each fighter, and whether in their prime or not. So Khabib in his prime, is Kevin Lee in his prime? Not really. Not mentally, not age-wise. It doesn't make so. That's the only thing. But Kevin Lee is so talented, I believe he could still do it.
Well, yeah, because that's what everybody said about Rose versus Joanna, where everybody was saying, I just wish Rose had just a little bit more seasoning, because it was the same age gap. She was 25 versus 30.
Joanna is no Khabib.
I know Joanna's no Khabib. but Joanna did completely clean out the division, and people did. She completely cleaned out the division, and a lot of people did think she was the GOAT female fighter. And I don't think Kevin Lee can beat Khabib as easily as Rose beat Joanna, especially the first time. But you never really, you just don't know that Kevin. He just has so much potential to surprise us.
Let me ask you guys this, right? So, in my opinion, what we're saying is that Kevin Lee probably has the best chance of beating Khabib in the division at this point, right? I'm not saying that Kevin Lee would beat Khabib, and I don't think you guys are saying that either. I think if the fight was to happen within the next, let's say, 6 months to a year, then Khabib would still be the favorite, although I would say that Kevin Lee would go in with a really good chance. What would you guys say? Would you say if, let's say, the fight's happening within a year, who would be the favorite?
Well,
of course, Khabib. Without a doubt, he's undefeated.
Khabib would obviously be the Vegas favorite, but there are kind of two ways to look at it. There's the Vegas odds, which is how people will value it, versus how the truth will actually play out. So, by all factors on paper and logic and everything, Khabib should be the favorite. But, it just wouldn't surprise me if Kevin Lee just comes out and just wins very convincingly. If he just does something to Khabib that we just didn't even think was possible. He just wins in a way that people didn't think were possible. Which is why I do bring up Rose and Joanna, where just nobody expected that whatsoever. And even though Khabib is more special than Joanna, Kevin Lee is going to surprise us. Honestly, I kind of feel like Kevin Lee would be slightly more likely to win, maybe 60-40.
Well, I actually believe so too. If we're looking at on paper, we don't know the invisible factors of heart and all that stuff, but they both have showed heart, Kevin Lee and still Khabib. So I agree. I kind of agree. I feel it could be hope as well. I really like Kevin Lee. I'm going to admit that part, even as a true seeker. But I think that on paper, you're correct. It just seems like he's more powerful. He can probably most likely definitely take down Khabib, because the fact that he can just lift up any fucking man and throw people down like it's nothing. then he doesn't even need to use Khabib's skill to take him down. He doesn't have to match Khabib in skill purely from a wrestling perspective. So, and I think he may be a better striker than Khabib.
Yeah, he's a 7-inch reach advantage.
And a 7-inch reach. Yeah, it just feels that way in certain ways. Again, but there's also a mental component of the game. I think, again, the good thing about the Barboza fight is that it showed that maturity that he had. And the Tony fight, again, we had to count that out because the guy was sick as fuck, right? He burned out in round 2. You know what I mean? That never happened to him before or after that fight, and that was very obvious.
Also, sorry, I was going to say one thing to keep in mind, though. The one thing about Khabib that's very impressive is the dude's never had a scratch on his face. He's fought he's fought a lot of fights, and he's 26-0. Never even had a scratch on his face. Even Kevin Lee versus Barboza had his face cut and stuff like that. But I'm just saying that there's something special about Khabib. It's very hard to catch him, very hard to hit him. Even El Acuenta admitted later on that it was very hard to even touch him because the way he moves and stuff. So there is something invisible, something special about Khabib that I think really makes him who he is. It's his wrestling, which is top notch, but even besides that, the way he moves and all that stuff, I mean, he's a special fighter. So I wouldn't say Kevin Lee would be favored going in. I would still say 60-40 with Khabib. I do agree that Kevin Lee has everything one would need to kind of beat Khabib, and Kevin Lee's wrestling is very technical. He's very strong. All that stuff's gonna be in his favor. But at the same time, Khabib is a special fighter, at least in my opinion. And
yeah. And you have a good point with a special fighter. I think with that gravity you're talking about it's right now it is quote unquote Khabib's time. He is at his peak maturity, mentally, spiritually, everything, and every level, right? He has all the parts together the correct way, right? Mm-hmm. And I think that's the main thing. That's why my main issue with the fight, if they fight sooner or later, is that we don't know how to perfectly find them when both of them are in their primes, So it's all about who's in their prime. I think that's what a lot of gravity will be that way. Just so Kevin in his prime, the gravity might shift towards him,
for sure,
or maybe not. But
also, I think the point about not having a scratch is important because you never really know what sort of nuance advantage Khabib has. And something I kind of noticed about Kevin Lee is he doesn't really get hit that much because he's normally dominating his opponent on the ground. But he is a little bit easier to hit than Khabib. So Khabib might just have a little bit sharper instincts, faster reaction times that will help him out.
You're right.
That's why it's an interesting fight because both guys have their own set of advantages, and it's just an incredibly interesting matchup. For me, I just feel like the strongest gravity is in Kevin Lee's strength, but it really could go either way.
Yeah, I agree with that. It definitely is. I think if they fight, I think maybe a trilogy could happen in the future. That would be beautiful for the sport. But
but to your point, Mark, though, I think the timing is very important. When they fight is very important. Like one fight I always think about in boxing is Mayweather versus Pacquiao, and I think when Pacquiao was in his prime, if he fought Mayweather at that time, then there was probably a good chance that he probably could have defeated Mayweather. But I think by the time they actually fought, Pacquiao was kind of not the same guy that he was. So timing has a lot to do with it. And let's say if Kevin Lee and Khabib, they fight 2-3 years later, Khabib might not be the same again, and Kevin Lee probably improves a lot. But if they were to fight within the next 6 months to a year, then I would say probably Khabib will have an upper hand.
I agree. I definitely, in terms of mentality. But who knows? Again, this is one of those fights where anything could happen, and I think it was one of the most interesting fights in a very long time. And again, as I said before, I don't mind seeing Kevin Lee fight at least 1 or 2 more fights beforehand. Anyways, I don't mind that just because I think Kevin Lee, still needs some practice. And here's another thing. Here's another question as well. And this is when I talked about trade-offs, right? And this is why I talked about Kevin Lee, in my opinion, is going to be a generally better mixed martial artist in the long run. Let's look at the Barboza fight. Let's be honest. Was it really that difficult for Kevin Lee to do exactly what Khabib did? Really? Let's say if Kevin Lee's main objective was just to win, and not to test himself. a little bit more. It's risky, of course. It has a risk to it, but let's just say he wanted to play completely safe, which is a great strategy in some ways. Now, it's a gamble, so roll the dice, right? Like, let's be honest. I believe that Kevin Lee could have grounded and pounded Edson Barboza for the 3-4 rounds until like they had to do corner stoppage. I believe that. I believe it. He's strong. His takedowns work. He didn't get that much takedowns defended or whatever. His takedowns were consistent. So in the third round, he could have continued. He could have. There's no evidence that showed that he couldn't. It wasn't like Khabib trying to take down Alaquinta like 5, 6, 7 times in one round. That's not what happened. He wasn't trying that hard. So, if he wanted to get less damage, he could have just done the Khabib method, right? Which is just, if it's working, don't try to fix it, right? Just continue going. But the interesting thing about what he did was, the interesting thing what he did was what I really appreciated was, man, I gotta say that what I like about what Khabib did, he on purpose decided to test himself because, again, in training he can't get that practice. How does he test himself against a world class striker? You can't just fly over to Edson Barboza in Brazil, and he's supposed to be a rival and try to spar with him every day. So the only way he can really get that higher edge is by allowing that risk to take place. And so, yes, he's a little bit more risky fighter right now, which is going to allow him to get hit more. However, I think that's the same thing that's going to make him chiseled and make his game that much more well-rounded. He doesn't have the fear factor of being undefeated anymore or trying to maintain an undefeated record. And which is good in some ways because it allows him to take some risks and some long-term risks. So the short term is like, okay, I'm going to beat this guy and get no scratches on my face, right? I'm just going to pound him until they stop the fight. Right? That's cool, right? But how does he learn when he has to face adversity? And I think that this is like a very, very deeper, cerebral part to Kevin Lee. I think that trade-off is like, it's a long-term trade-off. I'm young, I'm 25. Fuck it. I'm going to believe in myself. I'm going to bet on myself and strike with Edson Barboza, at least for this round, and see what happens. I think that was, in a weird way, more impressive to me than Khabib just sticking to the game plan and religiously taking him down. And let's be honest, when Khabib wasn't taking down Alaquinta at certain points, it's because Alaquinta was not allowing it. It wasn't because he just could have done it after that. Maybe he was sweat, maybe he was weaker, maybe Alaquinta got a little bit better at it. Who knows what happened? But when Kevin Lee decided not to, not to take down, even when it was obvious that it was his choice. And I just think that longer term goal, especially being young and not having to worry about being undefeated, I think in a weird way that risk really is going to pay him dividends. That fight, him getting that kick, that's going to pay dividends because it's going to give him that deeper level of experience that's required to be a true champion, a versatile champion, especially just in case in the future people figure out, some people figure out Khabib's game, he will have so much other tools in his arsenal. I think that was a brilliant play from Kevin Lee.
Yeah, I definitely 100% agree with you, man. But I also think, just to play devil's advocate, though, is that a good fighter also has to know how to mitigate risk. And if you see some of the great fighters, or at least someone that comes to mind for me all the time is Floyd Mayweather in boxing. And a lot of people were always one of the complaints everyone had was that he wasn't knocking out people as much, and he was more of a defensive boxer. But at the same time, playing it safe in certain arenas is not a bad kind of thing to do. But I get that, especially Kevin Lee being younger and he has a long time and he wants to learn. And all the point that you mentioned, I think it was a smart thing for him to do. But I think on the other hand, like someone like Khabib, who's kind of at this point, like he already has his game plan figured out. I think for him to play a safer fight a safer fight and actually mitigate risk is probably a better option in some ways. So it's also just like looking at risk versus reward and mitigating risk. But in Kevin Lee's situation, though, I agree that for him to actually keep the fight on the feet and not just destroy Barboza on the ground was a good learning experience and is going to pay dividend in the long run.
Well, I mean, the thing you have to look at for Khabib though is that yeah, mitigating risk is good for him to have an undefeated record, have no scratches, et cetera, et cetera. But what happens when he doesn't when he faces somebody like Kevin Lee, and let's say he fights Kevin Lee and he can't get the takedown, then the low risk option isn't available. You know, so like let's say for the sake of argument, like neither guy can take either guy down. Well, then
Exactly.
like who does
Being
that
able to
favor?
strike.
Well, Kevin Lee gets paid off for being in the situation where he was testing himself striking against the elite strikers, while Khabib was silly. Even though Khabib is, I think, low key like a pretty good striker. Like even Iaquinta couldn't hurt him,
or
even though he
maybe
was.
Kevin Lee just moves around the way he does, and not Kevin Lee. Khabib just moves around the way he does, and Kevin Lee can't catch him. I'm just messing with you, man. I mean,
Yeah.
honestly,
Well,
yeah, I think right. To your point, like it makes a lot of sense what Kevin Lee did, but I'm also saying on the other hand that as a fighter, you also want to be mitigating risk because
yeah.
all it takes is one punch.
Yes, of course. But again, when you mitigate too much risk, right? Just like in business, right? If you just have low risk all the time, you see, the trick is knowing when to take those chances, right? So of course, he was already intuitively understanding that most likely he's going to win this round, this square off.
Yeah.
He had confidence in his striking. And it needed to be tested. This is stuff like John Jones would do too. John Jones would do this type of shit. He would wrestle a wrestler. He would grapple a grappler. He would fucking outstrike a striker, right? So, these are the type of mentalities that's going to really be needed to take your game to that next level, especially, again, as I said before, as a mixed martial artist. I'm not talking about just having one game plan that's unbeatable. As a mixed martial artist, right, if you want to ensure longevity in the long run, especially, again, Khabib has his method figured out, as you said, right? He's in his prime. He has his method figured out. Kevin Lee doesn't, right? And maybe his method is just to be a master of all, right? But Kevin Lee doesn't have that one go-to thing. Or maybe he does if he tries to predict Khabib, but it's still not going to be quite Khabib, right? Kevin Lee doesn't do that, right? So he can't do what Khabib does completely and just like, okay, this is a safe way. He needs to grow in multiple facets. Because again, he's not exactly like Khabib that jokingly said to Max Holloway, or whatever. Like it takes 25 years to be able to wrestle like me, so it's not gonna happen in any training camp that you do, right? And there's some truth to that, right? But and so that's why I feel like Kevin Lee's definitely that was a brilliant play. I don't think he's gonna do it all the time. Hopefully he doesn't. But again, I feel like in the long run, for whatever reason, just in case you can't get a takedown on certain fighters that might have certain movements that make it more complicated, or the fight just naturally happens to be a standing fight. I feel like standing up and trading strikes and getting hit by the best striker in the division, at least the best head kicker in the division, and even better. I think that was a great thing that he did, because now that's a level of experience that most people won't be able to understand. Once and yeah, he could have played it safe and avoid all the adversity, but most people won't be able to. That's something that only him will be able to really take. There's like deeper lessons, even just subconsciously, that's going to help his fighter gravity moving forward. I think that fight helped him more than if he just ground and pounded him for all the rounds. I think that fight, and again, I'm sure he's smart enough to know when to do it. There's an intuitive thing in him. Same with Khabib. When Khabib decided to play a little striking match with Iaquinta, he knew that Iaquinta was kind of like a sitting duck at that point. Like he was already beat up a lot. He was already kind of withered away. So of course, Iaquinta's striking not going to be as effective. Now, let's say if Khabib struck with Iaquinta purely in the first two rounds, and then did a better job, then I would say, wow, Khabib's striking was great. However, as I said before, he knows when to take the risk, which similarly, what's his name did something similar too. So he still knew when to take the risk. It wasn't that random like a Gaethje, where Gaethje just went and just took a lot of headshots. He still knew the best time, round 3. You got grounded and pounded. So that probably going to affect definitely his striking anyways, Barboza striking, which kind of takes away from, I guess, Kevin Lee striking. Because if Kevin Lee grounded and pounded him for the first round or two and then stand up, I mean, it's not the exact same Barboza, let's just say that. However, it was still impressive regardless of seeing him strike.
Oh,
so, yeah, that's pretty much my thoughts of that.
Yeah, I mean, I definitely agree. And also, I think Kevin Lee is probably a better all-round fighter than Khabib. Khabib is not really a finisher from what we've seen. He does amazing ground and pound, but he doesn't. He's not really good at submitting a lot of his opponents. I think Kevin Lee has better submission game. I think Kevin Lee in some maybe I'm not sure yet, but maybe his takedowns are better than Khabib, and also I think his
hold on.
Yeah.
Can you repeat that? The takedowns?
I was saying that I'm not 100% positive, but it feels like Kevin Lee has better takedown than Khabib. What do you guys think?
I feel like Khabib has this interesting technique that just gravity that he just takes on everybody. I think Kevin Lee doesn't need as much technique because he's so fucking strong, right? And he still has great technique once they're on the ground, and he can grapple like fuck. So I think maybe in grappling wise, Kevin Lee might be a little bit better because he's stronger also. Grappling is different than takedown. At this point, the stats go to Khabib as much as I love Kevin Lee. However, Kevin Lee doesn't necessarily. Does Kevin Lee try to take down as much as Khabib? I don't think so. So it's a weird. It's very difficult to measure because unless we see Kevin Lee desperately trying to take down everyone he fights from now on, it's hard to measure that stat at this point.
Yeah, that's why I was saying I'm not 100% on it. But from what I can see, what do you think, Dean? Who do you think has better? Takedowns?
I think Kevin Lee's definitely just naturally better at takedowns because Khabib kind of does have to be more clever and mix in his strikes with takedowns and stuff, and he still does. I mean, Khabib's takedown game is still great. He eventually does get the fight to the ground most of the time. But Kevin Lee, it's like when he reached the point where when he wants you on the ground, you get on the ground, and that's been pretty consistent for all of his recent fights where he just he-mans you. And kind of the other point that I'm kind of interested to see is what's Khabib like off his back? Nobody's ever seen Khabib on his back before. I
mean, we can watch a few wrestling tournaments, I guess, of his, but I guess it makes martial arts different when you're getting hit in your face, right? Especially from Kevin Lee. I don't know. We just don't know.
And that's a very good question because guys who train at Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu are pretty decent from their back. Guys like Tony Ferguson, he's really good on his back. But Khabib, I think his background is mostly sambo and wrestling and stuff. I don't think he's really trained in submission as much. I could be wrong, but I think definitely hasn't trained jiu-jitsu as much. And that's why I think his submission game, even from the top, his submission game is not the best. And from on his back, I mean, I don't think he would be good at submitting anyone on his back. Yet to be seen, but I don't think he would be that good.
Well, I mean, I guess the bigger question is can he defend a Kevin Lee submission? Because even somebody like Tony, who's amazing off his back, Kevin Lee ended up getting a full mount with some serious ground and pound on Tony, and that's just not something we've seen anybody ever do to Tony. Like,
yeah.
Like people can like kind of hit him on his feet sometimes, but dominating him on the ground, that just doesn't happen. So if maybe like it could just be a situation where Kevin Lee just happens to get a takedown, and then just because Khabib hasn't been practicing his game off his back, that he just can't defend the submission when he gets to the ground. Now, granted, I think Khabib's probably enough of a truth seeker and intelligent enough and talented and skilled enough that he probably wouldn't be completely pathetic off his back.
But again, against someone who's better, who might be better and stronger,
Yeah, and like going back to like we were talking about training, he could be training on his back, but if he's not training with it's hard to find great training partners. So someone like Kevin Lee, he's gonna be really strong once he mounts, let's say, someone like Khabib and starts grounding and pounding him. So even if Khabib is training on his back, the level of training he's doing might not be what he's going to face when Khabib or Kevin Lee actually mounts him. So, there's a lot of questions that, I guess we just wouldn't know exactly until we see the fight.
Yeah, no, I just want to say, I guess right now we're moving to an hour. So yeah. I think, it's safe to close it on here. Anyways, guys, I guess, Sonny, let me know if you want to tell these guys anything. I mean, this is our podcast, our first podcast ever, episode 1, right? And right now we're kind of going with this is going to be a podcast about everything. It's just that at this point, since we talk about mixed martial arts at this point, we'll just talk about that for now. But there's going to be a lot of different topics about life, about different things that we'll talk about, or different events around the world that we want to give our opinion on. And that's pretty much it. But again, again, this talk has moved from Edson Barboza to Khabib because I guess that's a fight that everybody really wants to see. You know, I mean, we saw what happened to Edson Barboza, so there was no reason to talk about it thereafter. I would just want to say that for Edson Barboza, again, he's a great fighter still, and he's going to continue doing well. He just happened to fight his kryptonites twice, which is basically people with great wrestling, with great wrestling and great takedowns. Outside of that, for any other person that Edson Barboza fights, it's going to be a very close match.
Yeah, for sure, man. And, we're going to try to do a weekly podcast. So, this one obviously was dedicated to Kevin Lee. Next one, maybe we'll talk about Gastelum versus Jacare. We'll still try to figure out what we're going to do for the next podcast. But we're going to try to do a weekly podcast. And like Mark said, we want to start off with MMA, but we're obviously, at some point, we're going to be diving deep into other subjects as well.
Yep. So, guys, if you guys want to follow us, I guess you guys know where to go. We don't even have a website yet at this time, truthseekers.org. We'll figure it out. We'll get all that stuff handled within the next few weeks. But, thanks a lot for following, and let us know what you guys think. Any cool points, any things that you think that we should pay attention to, any points that we think we didn't mention. We'd love to hear your thoughts. Anyways, guys.
And one last thing I want to mention is our boy Dean here is basically he is analyzing different fighters and everything. He does this for a living. So this guy is super, super smart. So if you guys have any suggestion on another fighter that you guys want us to talk about, please let us know and we'll definitely do some research. And I'm sure Dean is already doing research on a lot of these fighters so we can talk about them.
And just to make it very clear, what Dean does, he does sports betting. So the only way he can make money is by winning more than he loses. So that's why that's how you know that he has to be a true seeker to continue making money in this field.
Yeah, I agree with everything that you guys said.
All right, perfect. All right, so this is it. We will see you next week.